Hey guys, and welcome. This is going to be a video about what I learned at the National Gallery, and it's quite a bit. So, I'm going to speak to you guys about all kinds of things, namely these ones. So function, technique, interpretation, influence, purpose, and how that changes the relative quality of the artwork. You don't have to understand any of what that means because I'm going to explain that a bit later. And we're going to go through some of the big hits of the artists that I saw. So Renoir, Monet, and Pissarro, just to keep it simple and just to explain some of the things that I saw and that were completely different than what I expected, and explain to you what I learned and how that's relevant to the drawing journey and understanding how art evolved and my perspective on that. Because I'm not going to have a perfect perspective on how art evolved right now. I need to look into it a lot more and go to a lot more places, see a lot more art in order to fully grasp what's going on there. But I did get at least a rudimentary grasp on what's actually going on, what actually happened, and why we are where we are in the modern day. So I have a take on that, and that's something to stay tuned for, okay? All right. So the first thing I want to show you is Renoir. So I didn't really looked at Renoir initially for any particular length of time. I was just like, that's a cool famous name. I don't really know that much about it, but whatever. And so when I was going over to Renoir's like painting, I was just thinking, okay, that looks kind of like there's not that much interesting going on there for me. And I was thinking like, well, I'll go over and I'll just sit with it and see what happens. I didn't read that it was Renoir. I just had a friend who was going like, oh, look at this one. I like this one. And I'm like, why do you like this one? And I was like, let me make up my own mind. So I come over. Your eye height was at the same height as this little girl. So your eyes were drawn immediately. Right there. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, that girl's really cool, charismatic, interesting. And then I noticed this. What is that, you might ask? That's a circle. Why is there a circle there? Well, it is because a circle traps your eye. So the circle keeps bringing you back here to the bottom of the painting. So he wants you to look down here. It's very clear he wants this to happen. There is also a little stick. Guess where this points? To this basket, which also points at the girl. And then you notice that all these umbrellas, that points to the girl, that points to the basket, that points to the basket, that points to the basket, that points to this woman who is carrying this basket. This woman's eye line points to the girl. And then it became immediately obvious to me what was happening here. So what is happening here? It is that he is intentionally directing people's eyes with technique. So he understands that these pointing lines in art direct the viewer's eyes and that he captures it in a circle, which is just cool and interesting. He's drawn these models on multiple occasions, actually, but you'll notice there's actually a few more design ideas in here. So it's not just about, those lines pointing everywhere. There's another line, this line coming up here, which is where you would travel or where you're aiming to go, because there's all these people with all their umbrellas And this is essentially your path, where he's got this little section here that you would move in. And it is drawn in a perspective. So there's another technique, drawing this in a perspective to point in this direction towards essentially what is the horizon line past here somewhere. So even though your eye is drawn here, your competing attention is going up here in order to direct you along this line, and everything then points you back. So the second form of grabbing your attention is also to grab your attention to where all these redirects are. So he has all these main redirections, and then he has a secondary thing saying like, hey, look up here. And it just makes you hit all these things again, and then back to here. This is the most neighboring part of the piece as well, that is neighboring this line. So it creates that composition. Then you can see this woman looking back, even this woman's arm sort of pointing on the same angle as that direction. And basically all the detail is up front and along these areas. All the detail is here and down here. And so everything fading off along these sections, much less detail. So you're meant to be looking at it through this sort of perspective and this sort of direction, where it's the mother and the child. And that is where the actual story is. So the story is the kid's looking at you, and the woman's like, oh, okay, yes, I'm being polite and I'm hefting up my skirt, and you'll be able to make your way through so long as other people notice you or whatever. And it creates that kind of moment in time feeling, which is actually really cool. So it's like, oh yeah, that is cool. And this woman adoring the girl. There's character interplay here, which creates a little bit of story. So does this woman know this girl? Does this girl know this girl? Maybe. And they're definitely aware that she's looking at you, and she's definitely aware of you. So it creates that sort of engagement, which is quite cool. And something I noticed about Renoir was he's super intentional with his techniques, and it was just clear as day. And I was like, that's really cool. So when you think about design in drawing, Renoir was amazing at it, and he knows all these tricks and techniques to work with it. There's some other things to note here, like how he's done the what do they call it? Just basically how he's done the dress here. So this dress and the way that he's doing this is actually kind of Roman inspired. And you might be like, why are you saying that's Roman inspired? Well, this kind of I looked through a lot of other artworks, and sort of in the past, in the Christian sort of paintings, they didn't really do a lot of like these garment type drawings. But as far back as you can go in Rome, they always did this kind of thing, where they did like all the folds and embroidery and showed that off because it was a kind of like a symbol or a status of beauty, or a way to add rhythm into statues and drawings of gods and so on. So they really kind of popularized, in my opinion, this kind of flow and dress and way to display this kind of thing. So you'll find artists past a certain period of time start to reuse this because they're like, that Roman sort of Italian way of doing things, boom, let's do that. So that's just something to note and keep aware of here as we move forward a little bit. So another picture from Renoir here is this house on the lake. So you've got these two women in a boat. And I don't know, maybe you want to pick out for yourself some ideas. But maybe the hint I'll give you is the use of warm and cool. So this is cool, this is cool. This is cool. This is cool. Inside here is cool. Along here is cool. Like in the shadow itself is cool. Along here is cool. Well, some parts of it anyway. That's cool. This is cool. But what else do you notice? Well, in different sections here, there is actually warmth. So you see this orange and this orange and her face and her clothing and this boat. And look here as well, this archway of this house and this lining here, little dashes in the trees, little dashes in the grass here, more warmth here, here, along here, up by this train, which you probably didn't notice, and then here is warmth on this, warmth here reflecting in the water, warmth here reflecting in the water, warmth here reflecting in the water. So what he's done here is he's used a combination of cool and warm to create the feeling of that sunny day, but with cool, refreshing water in it. And that's super interesting because he's bringing your attention places with these big hits of warm. And up to this reflection, to that reflection, and even more especially, seeing this home here? The reason this part is cool and then this part is warm is essentially to make this doorway and essentially the entrance to the house feel warm and inviting and homely. While this here feels a bit more alien and a bit more distant. So is this, and this train, and so on. But everything splashed around is then meant to make it feel homely and inviting and warm and enjoyable. And all that cool around it is meant to amplify that. So here, the shadow of this, you know, he's just suggesting warmth. He's not putting tons of detail there. He's just adding that warmth in there so that you can see that, feel that, and then it adds that vibe. So again, if you know Renoir is super intentional, he's definitely intentional about this color design here. Okay, so moving on from Renoir, let's look at Pissarro. Or Pissarro, or I'm not sure how to say his name. What you might notice here is this dotted nature to the painting. What a lot of people might think is, oh, because it's dotted, I guess, you know, it's just not as detailed, so therefore it's not as good. Ugh. But just take a look at it for a while. Allow your mind to collect together the pieces. Don't necessarily look for design, because unlike Renoir, while there is intention here in some of the techniques, there is another purpose to why it's kept speckled like it is. So what you'll notice is that all of this speckled nature to it is in order to reduce something I call interpretive resistance, which is basically he's breaking symmetry, or he's breaking convention, or he's breaking the assumptions you have of how to view what you're viewing, and he's breaking that apart. So it's almost like when someone tells you to do something, you'll be like, oh, okay, I'll just do that, and you'll do it without thinking. But if someone suggests you should do something, then you have to think for a while and decide for yourself whether you're going to do it or not. And that's what's happening here. So he's essentially using this technique, this overall technique, to suggest to you what to do, which is to look at it and then to take it all in. You will also notice he's using the technique of warm and cool. Look at these cool little patches everywhere. In every little shadow, he puts these cool little colors. See this line here? Look at that line of cool colors. Look at this. All the cool colors here in this shadow. All the cool colors in this shadow. All the cool colors along here. And here. And here. And along here. And across along this direction. Yeah. Even up along in here. He's got cool colors in here, cool colors in here, cool colors along here, along here, along here, along here. He's got neutral colors along here, these purples. Like those neutral sort of colors. And this back here is somewhat neutral. So he's not pulling your attention to the sky. He doesn't really want to draw your attention to the sky at all. He's not pulling your attention to the silhouette of this tree here, or this one, or even this one. And why isn't he pulling your eye up to that top third? It's because compositionally, he wants you to experience this warm, like dominant warmth in this picture. And then you've got this woman here, gives you scale, gives you a reference point, a way to experience it, a kind of portal into this place, position, how it feels, how people might live in it, so on. And it also gives you potentially an eye line that you are probably up on a hill, because here is the horizon and here is her. So your eye line is significantly above her, so that means you're probably elevated, because you're probably not two women tall. You're probably not this tall. Not this tall. So you're probably up on a hill somewhere. So you're looking down into this. And that gives it a little bit more interest, because it adds an element of perspective and breaking symmetry with that perspective to give you this sort of feeling of all the ground, where it all goes, and all that energy. And it's all driven in these bottom 2/3. And it's super interesting. Does that, it's not heavy-handed. It's just nice and soft and allows you to really see and feel the vibe, which is awesome. I loved Pizarro. I was like, oh, this is really cool, because it has a little bit higher of a ceiling than if you were to make it super defined, which say with this one of Renoir, it's a bit more defined. So really your eye can only bounce around in the piece. It can't reinterpret parts of the piece. This one of Renoir, you can reinterpret parts of the piece, definitely, but you're more or less going to be bouncing around with your eyes, and that's more of a design element and design techniques that are making you do that. You can reinterpret softly some edges, some forms of like the women, what's happening in the background and why the train's there, that sort of thing. But and some of the water, but you're not really going to reinterpret it quite as much as here with Pizarro, which is super interesting and super cool. And there's some lessons to be learned there that I'll get onto in a bit. Okay, here we are at Monet. And when I first looked at this, as you first walk past it or you first approach it, it's kind of like, whoa, there's just the splodges of paint. What's going on? I have no idea. And then you're like, okay. Like, I wonder if you can, maybe it's more clear, like, I don't know. Just imagine something like this, I guess. You would walk past and you kind of like feeling this and you're like, what? And then maybe you might see this and you're like, what? You don't think of them as reeds, you're just like, what? Huh? And then if you see it from a certain angle or you just stand there for a bit, it starts to become clear. And I think I'll put blue on this so you can see my arrow. What you'll notice here is if you look at the temperatures, orange is the warmest temperature right in the center. Then you've got magenta, which is fairly warm. And then you've got like this, this cool color. So, and you've got cool colors here, where he's using these aqua blue and green, like just here, that's purple. This is more towards the cyan aspect of green. This is quite saturated green. So you got this kind of greenish blue kind of mix in here with these. And there's some blue and greens, so on. And these contrast with the warmth, obviously. So that's quite simple to see. But what's less easy to determine is like this reflection. And this, I mean, when you're there, and you can see this has like blues, sort of purple against it, you know, on the outside rim of this this thing here, and it's got, you know, this rich orange popping through, even richer than over here, to bring your attention essentially to the reflection. So you have these cools, they help you see these warms to really start to see this reflection popping in and start creating like these silhouettes, start helping you see these stroke lines, start seeing that there are gaps between trees, between leaves and tree branches and so on. And essentially, the idea isn't to capture your attention with this lily pad. No, it's to capture your attention with the actual sunset, and to make you think of the sunset in a completely kind of inverted way. Like, do you ever just look at the sunset from the water? Like, everyone's done it, but you don't necessarily think of that as like an object of something you would, I don't know, paint. You're just like, oh, well, that's a reflection though. That's not the thing that I focus on. I look at the sunset and then it's kind of like secondary. I look at the reflection and like, oh, that's pretty pretty. But you don't really pay attention. So here, yeah, these lily pads are mostly to help assist your eye to experience this sunset. And the feeling and ambience of that sunset is expressed more as it filters through these trees and gives that contrast between, you know, cool and warm. So if you think of Monet as kind of like a way to transport yourself into that feeling or into that place where it has that mood and has that feeling, the more you sit with Monet, the more it starts to come together. It might look messy and pointless, like these are just strokes. Like, that's not like that's not detailed. And this and this and this. Why did he choose to do it this way and that way and that way? But as you start to answer these questions about why, you start to get into Monet's head and you start to feel like what he was seeing from his perspective. You know how words can mean so many things, but when you listen to someone's tone, you start to actually hear what they mean. Their tone sort of carries weight, and there is a lot of tone in how Monet is setting up everything here. This is not emphasized. He doesn't want you to really look at that. You don't need to look at that. You don't need to look over here. It's not necessary. Like, this is just to sort of point you up to the sunset. He's not pointing directly to it. He's like, yeah, just go that direction. It's good. And then maybe you'll catch like some of this S curve, you know, as it winds up and around. Maybe you'll see the perspective of the lake as it, you know, vanishes back. Maybe you'll start to see that this line of lily pads and this line of lily pads is kind of connected on the surface of the water. Maybe then you'll start to see, with all of this happening, that there is actually something right in the center that you can also see. That you can see the flashes of light peering through this, peering through the trees. Maybe you can see then that the light peering through the trees is meant to be the most captivating part. And then maybe you can sense that you can sense the warmth of the sun as it fades behind the horizon, and you start to just lose that warmth. And then maybe you can feel the way that the water is sitting, sort of waiting and tranquil, how it's cool and just sits there. And then as you're looking at that, all of a sudden you can see the intent behind what he's done here. There is design in there, but there is rhythm in the way that he's designed that. There are softer suggestions of where to look, to a point that you might get confused. You might lose direction and say like, well, I don't understand what he's saying. But then once you catch what he's saying, you're like, wait, whoa. And this is something he'll do again, this catching your eye with light to just suggest to you very subtly a feeling of the entire place. It's definitely intentional. And that's what we'll see here. This was probably my favorite of all the paintings. This one, when I stood in front of it, I stood in front of it for a while, just kind of like, because initially you look at this and you see the sails, and you're just like, that's a lot of room on this painting that isn't really used for anything, but just kind of is just there as one monotonous color. I'll let you look at it for a little bit and just think of some things. The very first thing that I realized is that these sails, they're actually there to act as somewhat of a relief from everything else. Now, why is he creating relief? It's because everything else in this is meant to be much more chaotic than this relief. So here is harmony. It's also to reduce your interpretive like certainty, to be like, oh, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to see exactly what I think he says right away. This is to block you and just be like, nope, this isn't my point, even though it's right in the middle or whatever. Look elsewhere. Wrong ahead, sir. Ba-ba. And you can see some things here, like, look, orange. So there's warm colors. Ooh, warm colors there. Ooh, little warm colors in the sails. Ooh, little warm color on that boat. Warm colors over here and here. That is there. But the reason these little warm aspects are there is for later. These little peppered aspects. So you can see in this little gap here, this little gap there, that little gap. Why is he singularly separating out these little tiny aspects? Why do those have much more detail than the sails have? And here? Oh, and back here. Oh. And here. And here. And here. These orange aspects. And there's orange aspects over here too. This is orange. This is orange. This over here is orange. It's because this orange and this way that he's set up all those little pockets and so on, you'll see a bit more of the point later, is essentially to set up this. Do you see how this and this is very different from this channel? And where does this channel lead? It's right here. And this is essentially the doorway to the piece. This is cool, this is cool, this is cool, this is cool, this is warm. That's cool. This is very cool. Leads you all the way up and then catches you here. So it's meant to catch you right in the center of the piece. But why then have all these warm aspects around here, away from this cooler center? The idea here is to set your mind into this little spot so that essentially you start to fold out. You slowly start to fold your mind out, slowly capturing more and more. You start to capture this, capture this, capture this, capture this, capture this, capture this more. Capture these little things, these little things, these little things. Okay, then we fold out again. And there's more detail. This is now suddenly suggesting silhouettes. And these silhouettes. It's also capturing this part and these people and this rich red, this rich orange boat here, and essentially these people and these oranges that start interacting with the ocean. And then you step back again. Pop. And you catch the last layer of this piece, which is much softer, but there's this, and there's this, and there's this. And if you notice here, there is rim light. Rim light, rim light. You might not know what rim light is. I'm going to remove this thing in a second so that you know directly what that is. It's lighting, shining from behind and to the left, and from the left side. See this lighting? In here, 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 here. How bright it is compared to the contrast of the silhouette. That doesn't happen naturally. You don't just put brush strokes down and have rim lighting there. Here, very clear. And why? And that's sort of reflected back up here again. Why does he want to create this complex of silhouettes hitting the light? And then, you know, there's these shadows along here and here and here and here and in here. Like a lot more shadows in here. A lot more shadows. These are rhythms. So this here is a rhythm. That's a rhythm. That's a rhythm. That's a rhythm. That's a rhythm. Rhythm, rhythm, rhythm. These are also beats and rhythms. So subconsciously, you're going to expect there's more beats, more rhythms. There's beats in here. Beat, 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 beat. So then, why would he have so few beats with these people? Oh, but he does have lots of beats with these people. They're all doing something. They're all moving. They're all doing some specific job. There are a lot of beats here. All of these beats. They're all around here. And this orange here is to display to you all these beats. Everything is in there. There's tons of beats. And so you're meant to look in the center here, slowly unfold, and start to see all these beats coming together. And then, once you finally see it, you should be transported there. So even the design, like how Pizarro's, the way that he doesn't define any specific edge exactly, leaves it more up to interpretation. Here, even the designs are separated in a way that still leaves it up to interpretation, but there is a weight, there is a push, there is a draw towards what he wants to happen by him accumulating these tiny suggestions. And in this piece, there is actually a complex and lively scene bustling and happening at just the edge of sunset, where the last of the sun is just catching the top of these buildings and steeping everything in that cool first touch of night, and all the people interacting and, you know, readying themselves to moor all their boats, get off the lake, and, you know, set about getting home or whatnot. So it transports you into the past where it's just like today, and you can feel all that liveliness and action just as it was then and just as it is now. And to me, that was just, when I fully saw it, it was like skydiving into it. Just everything just came on fire. Lit on fire. I was like, what is this? All right. So I want to talk here about function, technique, interpretation, influence, purpose, and relativity. So what does any of that mean? Okay, so some of the very first things that I saw in the museum, and I didn't display them here, was about function. And why were people drawing for a lot of things? And it was for, say, something like religion and story and things like that. And, you know, they'd all have the same face. You know, it'd be like, oh, hello, meet this guy who has like a weird nose and then like an outstretched face and then like weird arms and whatever. And most people, they would just walk past it and go like, ew, gross. But the point is, just imagine painting your wall and say someone says like, oh, you know, I need a story told and a this and a that and blah, blah, blah. And you're just like a normal painter. You don't know that much about art. And you're like, all right, yeah, I can do that for you. Like, we'll commission that. It'll be extra, but I'll try my best. And you'll go in there and then you'll like try your best to kind of like create a likeness of someone, and maybe you have someone that you're working with, you can like study their face a bit and you're like, oh, you know, I'll create their face, you know, where their face does this and this and this. And you'll start doing that, and all of the sort of merit of the artwork is about its function. And skill, technique, nah, that doesn't matter. It's just, you ask for it, here it is, I did what I could, and then the pastor's like, oh, okay, that's fine. I mean, that makes sense. And, you know, it helps me point out to all the people that come to my pews to like look and whatever, I can explain. And, you know, there I am, you know, standing up here, you know, pointing to the wall, and, you know, it's got like little bits of information that I can point to and then tell a story, and they can build that story more in their mind. And a lot of older artworks were all about that sort of function. Sometimes they had that function, but then they also had like better technique, and it would look much better, it would look much closer to realism. But you know, it would still be essentially about the function of what they needed for the church. So, or the monastery. So, you know, they might have something like a long table. So there's some French works, for example, that have like this long table. And this is before Da Vinci's, you know, Last Supper. They'd have this long table, and they'd start a story. So they'd start a story on the left, and, you know, girl meets boy. You know, they meet each other, and then, you know, then they're around this part of the table, and there's things happening here, and like there's conversations happening. And then along this part of the table, something else is happening. And then on this part of the table, and the story starts to evolve down the table. And then at the very end, you get to a point where there's some finish to the story, where there's like something else happening, like a house or whatever on a hill. Like, oh, wow. Okay. And they would do cool little things. Like they'd have like a little dog, like here, eating scraps or whatever. Like, I don't know. They're just doing stuff, eating stuff, whatever. And then maybe there's like a little monkey. Or like it could be anything. They'll just put like little pets and stuff doing stuff around the outside while they'll have like a story going and slowly moving. and pulling you towards whatever. So it would be a tool. So even if they use technique, the technique would be to serve the function. Which, if you look at earlier, even Roman paintings, which are probably better in technique at that time, even that has a specific purpose. It's to speak about the gods, like Venus or Jupiter, or any of the gods in their pantheon. They have this good technique or whatever, but it would be to serve a function. And so my thought is that essentially earlier works that a lot of people don't give credit to have a primary goal and primary purpose of function before they're like too worried about technique and that sort of thing. But as people's taste increased, or as they were exposed to more things from different places, so for example France and Italy had better technique compared to Britain at some points, and so that starts to influence and push more technique and more demand for better technique and so on into what they have it originally set there for, which is for that function of storytelling. And then there are other parts to the function that came with technique, which is I want to create awe, or I want to create some kind of emotional reaction in the people that come and visit this, so that it gives me more credibility. Like, look at me, I'm powered up now. Because, you look at this and then you think I'm just the best because I commissioned this piece, and look at my amazing tastes. Don't question it. Now I am just so far above everyone because I have this amazing portable one that I added on top, which has this amazing artwork that we got from another place or from a special artist that has amazing technique. And so they're like, oh my God, that's amazing. Wow. I can almost imagine it exactly happening. And it gives everything credibility and weight. So one aspect of the function may be to actually illustrate the idea. Another might be to convince people and increase that impression that it has on them. And also that increases your credibility as like a monastery or a priest or whatever. And so this function and technique, it kind of like evolves. But eventually what happens is you slowly get an awakening or an awareness of design. So like Renoir and so on, or Monet and Pissarro and all that, they're in this sort of realm where they've seen through like tons of influences. They've got tons of influences. They're standing on the shoulders of loads of giants, in a way, who have formed technique and realism and so on. Because after the point of having like people see these good pictures and like they'd see them at church or whatever, there started to be people that wanted them for themselves. They're like, but I want like to see myself. I want like to be the most amazing like visage for like my legacy or whatever. I want people to remember me just like they remember those great people that I have seen in those stories. And so they want more technique. They want to look like really pretty or whatever, because they don't want to tell a story. They just want to like be seen. And so more technique gets developed and developed and developed, and you get this realism sort of thing going on. But eventually people start making interpretations about this. Like, what's this person doing? What do they mean? They're no longer being told what it means. They're starting to interpret what it means. And do they like this thing or do they not like it? What's actually going on here? Do I like this? Do I not like it? I don't know. Is it painted well? I don't. Whatever. And so there wasn't really anywhere to go with this interpretation. And because of there being less room to interpret anything, then it sort of creates this box that everyone was like trapped in. Like there's nowhere to go with art. Like it's just a craft that requires certain techniques and that's it. You sit there, you sit in your box and you feel bad. Like just you're a slave. Stay there. Don't dream of anything more. Just stay down, whatever. We don't care. But as people gain the impact of influences from other people and so on, they start to see ideas of design. They start to see ideas of how they can actually change their works to suggest something different. And so the purpose completely changes from function and technique to a point where they're actually capable of breaking technique. The very thing that was prized becomes the thing that they destroy. Oh, there's perfect symmetry in that. There's perfect edges. There's perfect setup of whatever. Boom. Let's get rid of that. Because the function and the purpose of what we're doing here is different now. And we want to gain a bit more grasp on interpretation. And in this way, expand influence in other directions and then change the purpose of art and make the way that art is seen much more subjective. So instead of it just be about function or technique, all these influences, the changes of purpose and the changes of interpretation, all then free this guy from the box where all of a sudden you can express something in a relative way. And so art no longer becomes the exact, the precise, the demanding. It becomes things like this, where you can experience something and relative to technique, even though it's breaking technique, it's establishing understandings about the world and the way to represent it that then carry into modern day as an understanding of design. And so even though your mind is darting all over the place, going different places, not capturing the exact right thing, and maybe having a different interpretation than another person or whatever, that's an accomplishment that has happened over time as we've pulled away from some functional aspect of how it's been done and how that came with certain complacency, and then developed into better technique, into gained like influences from different places, started to look at like interpretations of things, and then that changed the purpose of art and how good something is based on a relative scale rather than a strict technical scale or functional scale. Something I'd also mention is that after this point, I feel like the function was initially stories. Like with Christianity and also with, I don't know, the pantheon of gods or whatever, that was about stories. And it's about getting you to understand something of their history or whatever. Well, the function after well, basically how manga evolved is some of the best manga work, like when it first started to come into like comics and manga and whatever, some of it in the on the Western side of things was actually Christian comics. There were Christian comics doing Christian stories or whatever, biblical things. Just like, you had these pages, and they were just literally just squares actually. Just loads of squares, and then each square would have like some text, some text, some text, some text. Be really boring. Um, and a writer would just write their part of things, and then the illustrator would just be like, hey, illustrator, get in there and draw pictures for each of these boxes. That's what we want you to do. But then, the person that owned the company that did this dies. Like, he's gone. The son comes in, and the son is like, I don't really like doing religious comics. I want cool artists that are going to break some rules. And they should come in and they can do whatever they want to this. They can break it apart or whatever. And, they started to get like authors that did different things to showcase like their story differently. And so, they'd highlight parts that they wanted to highlight. They would stagger parts that they wanted to keep like really sort of choppy and just quick to pass through. And they started to redefine what comics were. And this is something that like influenced things all over the world. Like manga and Western comics, they influence each other in some ways. And you have this sort of resurgence where art now repurposes its function from freeing the artist to then freeing the story, or freeing the story of that artist, how the artist wants to tell that story. He now has a freer way to tell a story. He can tell it in different styles. He can use different design techniques. He can use different structures. And he can use different influences. Or she, obviously. And all that can be put together in different ways, in different compositions. And all of that can use the same principles of painting. Like what Monet does, you can do that in artwork, in stories. You can lower the interpretive resistance of what you're doing, and you can drive that into what you're doing and mix it up. Make your stories better. Make them start to shout out exactly what you want them to. You can make them have a higher ceiling and a person has to watch it for a longer period of time until they get it, or you can make it have a lower ceiling and make it very clear immediately off the bat exactly what something means. And you can adjust these dials however you want. And I feel like the function of art has sort of repurposed and reconnected back to its very origins when it starts to connect back with stories again and storytelling. With that said, there is one last thing that I want to talk about. And this is what I learned. And some of it was that I was doing some things wrong. So when I looked at Monet before, I kind of thought like, oh, he just kind of like creates a central focal piece and then kind of like gets blurrier on the outside. And, you kind of then just see greater and greater detail slowly getting more and more enhanced from like a compression or something. But what I realized was it's not necessarily that at all, because while he does do that and does use techniques like that to create like this slow pulling kind of force, these tides that influence your perspective, he's much more complex than that. So he might use tides that then have like compositional flow. And the reason or the purpose behind doing this kind of thing isn't to be like, oh, just randomly do it so that there's enough looseness so that it gets to do whatever. His purpose is to make you have that experience, the same experience he is. That's his intent, is to get you to have an experience. And what I thought is I started to think like, well, I want to do all these techniques to make something crisp and exact. Like, oh, here's that cube. Whoa, now you see this cube a certain way and you're like, wow, I love this cube. Wow. I thought it was to amplify like something that was drawn with good technique, like to amplify the appearance of technique. It wasn't. It was about breaking technique and making it so that you don't even need to perform in that way. You don't need to be insecure and say, oh, my artwork, yeah, it's as good as any other modern day piece. It's not about that. You don't need this. You need this. It's about the purpose of your design, not about the quality of your design. And the quality is going to be how well you execute on your purpose. Whether that be story or whether that be an experience or whether that be anything, you want things to pull like gravity towards exactly what you want someone to experience or to have. And so the principle of Monet is a principle of confidence and a principle of purpose. And when I saw that and understood that, I was kind of like slapped, because I realized I was making a mistake. There was still a part of me that was trying to prove something. And it's like, don't prove something, be something. Like that old Yoda quote, don't try, do. I was like, I see my flaw now. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. With Renoir, his lesson to me was kind of like, design is powerful, but it isn't everything. So it allows your eye to move around. It really makes your eye agile. Like, bump. This is what your eye will just keep doing. If you create good design, it'll keep moving. It'll keep moving a person through the page and doing stuff, which is super powerful. If you want someone to read a story, you want their eye to move. And as it keeps moving, if it's well designed enough, they're going to start to get a sense of the story. They're going to get a sense of the idea and all the forms on it, all the ideas. They're going to completely master what you're trying to say. So the better you design, the more you take on the burden for other people of interpreting what you're doing. So you reduce how much they have to do and you make it easy for them, and then they can follow that pathway to where you want to get them. It might not be particularly deep where you try to get them to, but you'll get them where you want to get them to. And then what I understood from Pizarro was, okay, but we can just use techniques, some techniques, to break up what this design is, just to end that idea of like, this is exactly where you go. This is exactly where you go. Just break that a bit, just enough. And the more you break that, yeah, you add baggage and weight to how you interpret what you're going to see. But what also happens is, say if there's a certain ceiling to what a painting had like before, that ceiling increases. So instead of a 1-story home, now you have a 2-story home where there's a second interpretation baked in right there. And that's just because you broke those connections, you broke those design elements, or you broke those technical aspects. And then, it's not as difficult from the viewpoint of Pizarro to then understand what Monet is doing, which is then putting the 3rd story on that house, where he breaks even more rules by turning design into compositions and rhythms in order to get you to this 3rd place, which is just completely transporting you. And if you've ever gone to my Twitter, you'll know that my purpose as an artist and learning art is to transport people into my stories. I want to eventually transport people into my mind's eye where the story is happening. I want them to actually feel it, sense it, and be able to experience it as real as life itself, or as close to that as possible. Monet hits that out of the park for me. And so to me, he's like the artist I admire the most right now, simply because of that. And I want to see more paintings of him whenever I can, and start to understand how he's getting to this 3rd floor here. Like, first, cool, yes, absolutely. Nailing like minimal design is important, because you make things light for people, and then breaking some rules, super important, and then going even further, make it immersive. Absolutely. So I started to realize there's this level of complexity that you want to understand in how you're developing the art that you're doing. And by having enough reference points, you can kind of see what's actually going on. Like, as the techniques are breaking and as everything is breaking apart, you're able to reach further. And if you're stronger, you can pull it all together, whoosh, and then be transported somewhere. And that's kind of, to me, one of the best purposes of art, is to take you where the artists wants you to go, so you can kind of read their mind, experience it, understand it, and then achieve the ultimate function of art, which was initially to tell stories. And now to tell stories in such a way that it's free, limitless in its expression, and can completely take you where you need to go. And to me, when I saw all that and I understood these paintings, I realized that my goal of transporting people somewhere was completely possible. And that's what I learned from the National Gallery. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you got to learn a little bit more about art than you normally would. And I wish you well, and I hope you have fun learning. All right, bye.